invite Mark McCrindle up to the lectern to give us a highlight, Mark, of the latest PSI results. Come up to the table, Mark, I'll introduce you. Mark McCrindle is a social researcher with an international following. He is recognised as a leader in tracking emerging issues and researching social trends. As an award-winning social researcher and engaging public speaker, Mark has appeared across many television networks and other media. He's a best-selling author, an influential thought leader, TEDx speaker, Principal of McCrindle Research, and most importantly, the driver behind the Hills Business Performance and Sentiment Index. Please welcome Mark McCrindle. Fantastic.
Thanks, Anthony, and thanks to your team and to the Chamber for having the vision to initiate and get behind this Business Performance Sentiment Index. Thanks to Council for getting behind it as well. 3 years in a row, it shows great insight. And for making it freely available, to the whole community. It's fantastic, and for generously printing up these reports that we all have at the tables. There's more outside if you want it, and the electronic version of the report is on the Chamber's website as of now, so you can grab that at any point. And thanks to all of you, so many of you, for participating in this study as well. More than 200 businesses in this area took part in the study, and the results are what I have to share. Now, there's 50 pages in the report, so just in a few minutes, I'm going to give you an appetizer, as it were, of some of the key results. The business PSI stands for Performance Sentiment Index, and the performance part is what's happened in the last 6 months in our businesses, the actual results, the revenues, the profits, what's been actually going on. And the sentiment part of the PSI is the forecast, the business confidence, if you like. What are the expectations over the 6 months ahead? The performance and the sentiment. But there is a third component to the whole index, and that is the conditions, the context in which we're operating. Are we facing headwinds, or have we got some tailwinds giving us a boost in business? That's the third and key area. And I want to begin there by looking at the context of business in Australia and locally here at the moment. So we are living in a nation that is growing very strongly. 24.4 million people is the population. 1.5% is our population growth rate. Now, let's think about businesses in Australia, and you can see that there are nearly 2.2 million businesses in Australia that are actively trading, and they have grown numerically by 2% in the last 12 months. So the business activity, or the business numbers, are growing even faster than the population numbers. Let's bring this closer to home, to our part of the world. The population of the Hills Shire, as of the new boundaries from a year ago, is about 168,000 people, and home to, as you can see here, more than 20,000 businesses. This area really is an entrepreneurial hotspot. In fact, if we compare the share of population of this region to the business share, you can see the results of that. The Shire holds 0.7% of the national population, but fully 1% of all trading businesses, clearly punching above its weight here when it comes to businesses and their activity. If we put this in ratio form, we are an entrepreneurial nation. It means that there is one actively trading business for every 11 Australians. Let's bring this down to the Hills Shire, and there is one business for every 8 residents here. Sorry, just get that up there for you. So that just gives a sense of the scale of business activity here. An entrepreneurial nation, and one of the most entrepreneurial parts of this nation right here in the Hills Shire. Now, let's see what's happened by way of business counts in the last year. Nationally, the numbers of businesses have increased by 2%, highlighting the strength of the New South Wales economy, still leading the nation. The number of businesses in our state have increased by 3%, but here in the last year in the Hills Shire, the numbers of businesses have increased by 4.5%, and this has been consistent growth. Let's think about the breakdown of businesses in Australia. We really are a small business nation. You can see that 3 in 5 businesses nationally are non-employing businesses, with 2 in 5 being in the employing others outside of the operator category. Now let's break down those employing businesses for a moment, and you really get a sense of the strength of small business in Australia. you see that fully 1 in 4 businesses are in that micro-employment category, employing between 1 and 4 people beyond the owner-operator. You've got 1 in 10 that are in the small business category, employing between 5 and 19 people before we move up to the medium-sized businesses, a couple of percent, and large businesses, a fraction of a percent. In other words, 97.5% of all businesses in Australia employ less than 20 people in terms of their small or micro categories, and 99.9% of all businesses are in that SME category. That's the breakdown. So we really do ride on the small business back in this nation. So what's been happening by way of business startups in the last year? In New South Wales alone, every business day, there are 423 new businesses that open the door for their first day of trade, and 3 of those businesses are right here in the hills. Just checking we got the numbers up there. But unfortunately, every business day in New South Wales, 340 businesses close. Now, if we look at the growth of business startups, it's increased by 12% in the last year, whereas the closure rate has pretty much, well, there's been a negligible change in that regard. So all of that shows some pretty good times. The trends are headed in the right direction. If we look at business entries and exits or survival rates, you'll see that if you track a sampling of those businesses based on their size for 4 years, regardless of how long they've been trading, you'll find that 4 years on, 6 in 10 of them are still trading. That is the survival rate, 62%. That is unchanged over the last year. If you track a business from its first day of trade, clearly the survival rates are not as great because it's in those early years that a lot of businesses fail. And so the survival rate of new businesses from startup that make it into their 4th year of trade is just over the halfway point, which is the first time it's crossed that threshold for some years. And so that is a positive result. As you can see there, it's up slightly from the 2016 result when it hit 49%. So growth in terms of survival of new startups, which is great. That's something of the conditions, the context in which businesses are operating in this state and locally. In the measure, the PSI, there's the conditions, the performance, and then the sentiment as well. The other conditions, and there are 7 in each of these 3 categories that we measured, are there for you. Again, you can unpack that in greater detail in the report. And we look past conditions then to performance. Again, the actual metrics of what's been happening in business for the last 6 months. And then we look at the sentiment or the outlook as well. All of that gives us the index, the Performance Sentiment Index, which is graphed on this table. So the results, the PSI, as of this last study, which was just closed off in April, so it's literally hot off the press. The conditions were down slightly, and they're in that negative zone, headwinds rather than tailwinds at the moment. The performance is slightly down on what it was, and you can see it's not red hot, but the sentiment, the outlook is in the positive zone, which is great. All up, that gives us a PSI of 0, which is down on the PSI from last year, which was at 11, so in the positive range. But it's up on 2015, when it was at -12. And so if we look at how it's changed, those 3 elements that make up the PSI in the last year, you can see each of the categories has dropped. Most significantly, the conditions has dropped, and that gives an overall PSI drop as well. So those 21 different measures, those different indicators that appear in the survey, that's how they play out. Each of those is a code, the C for the conditions, the P represents a performance measure, and the S represents a sentiment measure. You can see that the middle point at 0 is roughly where it plays out. But let's have a look at what were the 2 worst, what was in that strong red zone. Local infrastructure and expenses, just the costs of running business, staff expenses and other business expenses came in very strongly in the negative zone. The 2 top response areas, as you can see, the staffing levels, so a sentiment that we're going to add, not decline in staffing in the 6 months ahead, and revenue, a strong positive outlook. Businesses here believe the 6 months ahead will be better than the current situation. The qualitative aspect of the research highlighted this as well. I just put up a couple of the statements relating to those negatives. You can see the travel difficulty in getting to and from work and to meet clients on the premises, lack of parking, and horrendous travel situation in the Bella Vista precinct. So we get that, that's clear, and that came through strongly. Staffing, paying for staff and securing quality staff in the area, and the third one there, costs, the business expenses, so they came through very strongly as the negative. There's a lot more in that report that you can access. I just want to finish with one final point and one final aspect of the report, which is the Net Promoter Score. And this is a score you might use across products or services that you offer. How likely, you ask the customer, how likely would you be to recommend this product, this service to client, colleague or friend? Well, we apply this to doing business in the Hills area, and the results were quite strong. The Net Promoter Score works by looking at the 0 to 6s, those that are cool or neutral, and we call those detractors, and then you look at the passives, the 7s or 8s, you don't do anything with them, and the 9s and the 10s are your promoters, your raving fans, and you subtract the 0 to 6s from the 9s and 10s. In other words, if you end up with 0 or above, you're doing well. I mean, even if you have as many in the positives, the promoters, as the detractors, you're doing pretty well there. So a 0 score is good. You can see the results there. The majority in the probably or definitely likely to refer colleagues through to doing business here. So we believe in this place. People find good results here, and 68% of all respondents of all local businesses said probably or definitely would recommend this as a place to conduct their business. Overall, that gives the NPS at a result of 6, which is in the good range. It's a solid result and highlights that despite some of the short-term challenges around infrastructure that is clearly underway and probably at a bit of a pain point at the area, despite the current economic headwinds, particularly the national economy was rated worse than the local one. Businesses recognise that these are temporary. They are optimistic by the nature of what they do, and they are looking forward to the 6 months ahead. A lot more in the report. You can get it at businesspsi.com.au. A little bit of a snapshot. We might answer questions later, but thanks for listening.